Hey everybody, welcome back to a long-awaited PC port review. Today we're looking at Outer Worlds 2, and yes, it stutters just as bad as you've in fact heard. We've got another Unreal Engine 5 game here that is of course going to cripple your PC as much as possible. Now, in this default area where we're seeing this cutscene, we're getting around 71 to 72 FPS. Intel Presentmont up here showing us some slight variations in frame time, but nothing too crazy. The GPU busy line also does in fact look good, and that's mostly because we don't really have a massive CPU bottleneck. However, though, in this cutscene, things will change once it is over. VRAM allocated is 9.6 gigs, VRAM dedicated is 5.2. So as of right now, if you got an 8GB card, you should be maybe okay. You may have to turn down textures a little bit. However, though, in terms of the CPU usage, you can see that every core and thread of my 7700X is being taxed. I normally love this kind of thing to see because I really hate it when there's simply just one or two cores that are doing the majority of the work. However, though, things can get pretty sticky later on because I think what's happening is the game is in fact using the CPU to try and go through and fix any sort of shader cache compilation like we saw with 2018 Spider-Man and even Miles Morales. As we pull back the camera now from 72 FPS, we're sitting at around 83 to around 90. But as we go into the settings, we can clearly see we have TSR and it is set to balanced from 1440p. So there are some concerns as to how much upscaling is in fact going on with this game right now. Even the settings for the preset is set to very high, and things are going to get a little bit different when we start jumping into native resolution, especially in game. So that nice juicy 90 FPS, well, you may not really enjoy it later on once you go ahead and make some adjustments. Setting the resolution to native with TSR and then moving everything to the very high preset, I wanted to see what a 7900 XT could actually do with Unreal Engine 5. Of course, sometimes the menu got caught up a little bit, and would you look at that, we are sitting at below 60 FPS at native resolution. Upscaling on UE5 is doing the majority of the work even in the earlier sections. And the thing is, this game can be incredibly deceiving because for the first hour, especially in this main ship hub, you will have basically zero stutters. Hell, even in the most sections after this, you'll have zero stutters. And you'll think to yourself, Alex, you're crazy. Nothing is going wrong with this game. Everything runs fine. I'm getting well above 60 FPS with just upscaled resolution, and things in fact look pretty good. Well, once you get to the main planet, things in fact will probably more than likely start to change. As you can see though, still at native resolution on this main hub area, we are sitting well below the 60 FPS threshold mark. For a 7900 XT at native resolution on very high settings, it really shouldn't be doing this at all, pretty much. I should be sitting at least 60 FPS at the bare minimum, but we can't even reach that without any sort of upscaling. And the thing is, the next sections, when you begin to use upscaling even more to get that 60 FPS playable frame rate, things become a little bit easier to play actually, and it's honestly kind of weird to see. Here we are on the first mission, and we're actually doing quite well in terms of frame time and stutters. Nothing really major happening, some micro stutters here and there, but nothing too obscene or out of control. We're looking at RAM allocated sitting at 20 gigs, but dedicated sitting at 8 gigs. So if you got a 16GB actual PC with RAM, you should be pretty much okay with this as well. In terms of VRAM, 10 gigs allocated with 6.5 dedicated, so even 8GB cards should be okay as long as you turn the texture resolution down. But again, frame time graph doesn't seem too bad. Nothing too outlandish like we saw with a lot of other games that use Unreal. So it's incredibly deceptive at what happens early on in this game. And even then, when we turn actual upscaling back on, we even get a really good frame rate while playing. Right now, we're moving the actual resolution down to FSR and using the quality preset just to see what kind of frame rate we would get. And we are sitting back in that really nice 76 to 77 FPS inside the game. CPU usage on cores and threads is still looking pretty pretty good. We've got some good headroom there, which is honestly going to be an anomaly when you see what happens later on when you get to a main planet. But still, gameplay looks rather good. Frame time graphs don't look bad. There's no major stutters. And anyone playing this game early on would think to themselves, hey, we've actually got a great port with Unreal Engine 5. This is honestly incredibly shocking. Who would have actually ever guessed? Well, things unfortunately, though, take a turn for the worst when you land on the first planet. Now, in the first open world, things can in fact look a little bit different. What you're noticing right off the bat is that there are some slight micro stutters happening in Intel Presentmon's frame time graph. Even though the GPU busy line does in fact look pretty good and we don't have any CPU bottlenecks, the CPU cores and threads itself are actually being used quite heavily. We saw this happen in the previous section before, and like I said, my guess is the entire reason we're seeing this kind of usage in CPUs is because they're probably just compiling shaders with the CPU on its own. And at the same time, it helps in reducing the stutters, but it is also a heavy use on the actual performance of the game itself. Dropping everything down to high, we get a stutter and we're still sitting in that 72 to 80 FPS range. So even adjusting actual settings inside of the game doesn't really help at all from going from very high to high on its own. Some sections will jump up to the 80 FPS mark, but still we're getting a little bit of a concern here and there. And really, what I'm noticing right here is that this game is in fact very CPU dependent. If you don't have a CPU that is of, I would consider to be the mid to high end, you're going to have a very difficult time, which really explains why a lot of consoles are having a hard time with the stuttering. And we're going to prove that as well when we go ahead and use this on the Asus ROG Ally X, as well as onto the Steam Deck itself. Now, when you get into combat, that's where things really start to break down on this game. As you can see with Intel Presentmon, the GPU busy line is having a bit of separation. And what that basically means is the CPU is being bottlenecked. That's pretty much what that means. Even with a 7700X, we are still waiting for this thing to catch up to either go through and provide a better frame rate overall. No matter what kind of upscaling I use, I'm never going to get any better of a frame rate, even if I move it to ultra performance, because the CPU is in fact being choked out. And even the CPU cores and threads are hitting into the 70 percentile at some points while playing in this game. That's where you're going to see a majority of the issues happen. Again, if your CPU is not going to be anywhere newer or not have enough cores and threads or be able to handle most of this, you're going to have a tough time overall and have a really bad experience in terms of stuttering. Even though I'm basically brute forcing myself on this game, I'm really not at the high end terms of hardware. I'm actually in the somewhat mid to high tier, I guess, or high mid tier if you want to call it that. And really that doesn't make a lot of sense on why this game looks this way, yet performs this way either. And even then, it does have this weird thing where you'll just go back and forth between different sections and things will just run great in one moment and then fall apart and run horribly the very next. And honestly, there's no better way to present more of that kind of information than with having more mid-tier level hardware to show you guys what in fact happens if you don't have a, I guess, higher end model of a CPU or even GPU, because things could get really dicey, especially when you run it on the Steam Deck and even on a $1,000 Asus ROG Ally X. So here we are with the Steam Deck version. As you can see from the frame time graph, things are in fact looking a lot rougher than they were on a 7700X and 7900 XT PC. Right now, the CPU cores and threads on the Steam Deck are sitting at a toasty 85% usage across all cores and threads. VRAM is at 4 gigs. So again, 8 gig cards, you should be fine. This is sitting though on the actual low preset right now. And we are in fact on the balanced setting for the game itself. So we're getting on 35 FPS. And honestly, I'm still kind of impressed at what the Steam Deck can do even a few years later and still being long in the tooth. If you have a white ROG Ally, this is going to be pretty much the exact same performance you're going to be seeing as well. So there you go. Now you know exactly how your game is going to play. GPU usage is sitting around 95%. We're almost flush, but not really. And the thing is though, every single time you perform an action, you're going to get a stutter. You can even see it here as you are progressing and traversing to the actual world itself. I love using the Steam Deck for these kinds of games because it does show the limitations on what happens when people focus specifically on just higher end hardware. finding something in the middle is a better way of seeing things. And you can even see on the frame time graph below that, you can see all those stutters happening in succession. You're not having a smooth line all the way across. It really doesn't sit well or look good either. Even simple traversal gives you stutters as well, even though I've walked back and forth in multiple sections of this area. Again, if you don't have a good CPU, you're going to have a really difficult time with this game, and it's going to stutter for you practically on every aspect. On top of that though, you're going to be CPU bottlenecked regardless of whatever that you do. And the reason for that is because, like I said before, my guess is that it's using the CPU to compile shaders. If we go into the settings menu and we drop it from balance to ultra performance, please don't vomit on your chair when you see what it looks like. You're going to see that we're not even getting a massive jump in frame rate, mostly because we're just already tapped out on the CPU itself, and it looks pretty terrible. It honestly reminds me a lot of Avowed, actually. Almost the same kind of color scheme, and even at the same time, the same kind of performance as well. Things don't really look that good. Frame rate got into the 45s at some sections. Dare I even say touch the 50s at some point, but even then it'll drop back down. You could maybe possibly lock this to a 40 FPS lock on your Steam Deck and then try to play it at ultra performance at the lowest setting and then play it from there, but I really wouldn't recommend it overall. It would look even worse than it does now, and even on the deck screen itself, I kind of wouldn't recommend it. My personal recommendation though would be, at the worst possible case, a 40 FPS lock. Ew, don't do 30 ever, in my opinion. 30 FPS is totally unplayable. 40 is somewhat better, but still not playable. And you're looking at just having a somewhat okay experience if you are in nothing but a pinch. My recommendation would be to set things to low, put it to balanced because of the CPU bottleneck. You're really not going to make a big difference in terms of performance overall. You get a better quality image as well because of the upscaling. And if that's the only option for you, then that may be the best course of action. As you can see, we went from 45 FPS to 43 FPS, going from ultra performance to balanced. There's no reason to go below balanced. Your CPU bottlenecked. It's stupid. The only way I would play this game on a handheld would be if I streamed it from my PC to my Steam Deck from my internal PC that way. That's about it. Mostly because the game degradation, the visual degradation, and also just the actual performance doesn't sit right with me. I'd rather play this game at 60 with just better visuals overall and just having it streamed to my device. The Asus ROG Ally, though, does a little bit better, but you'll see. Now, on the ROG Ally X, you may already notice a pretty big difference. First things first, it is at 1080p on the resolution, even though we are using TSR for quality upscaling, so we are still upscaling the actual game itself. We moved it to FSR for balance to see what it would operate on, and then we dropped all the settings down just to low. I want to see how it would actually look and perform, and if we could even do something with that. I did want to see what medium looked like as well, but there was a bit of a hang up when you first get out of that and set all the settings, and that's probably why. Now, when you load back in the game from the settings menu, you're going to get a pretty big stutter like we saw before. Don't worry, I still haven't really ironed out all of the stuff for MSI Afterburner with the ROG Ally, but pretty much here it is. At medium settings, you're getting around 37 to 40 FPS. Not great, even with FSR balanced. Let's knock it down to performance and to low settings. This is going to be at 1080p upscaled from a pretty much low resolution, and what you're looking at right now is still 45 to 50 FPS. Now, this is going to be 10 FPS better than what we saw on the Steam Deck on average, which is still infinitely better than what we saw before, but you're still going to be at frame rates that are pretty rough to play. And even then, you're still upscaling quite a bit. Moving on, we'll go from performance over to the balance section of FSR just to see how things would actually look, or the quality on TSR, and pretty much keeping everything still at low. I really wanted to see what the good settings for this kind of device would be, because at $1,000 my expectation would be that it would at least perform to the 60 FPS standard mark. But of course, Unreal Engine 5 rears its ugly head. Putting everything to TSR quality, we're still getting 40 FPS. I think, in my personal opinion, if you set FSR to balanced and you set all the settings to low, you could in fact set up yourself to a 45 FPS lock and have a variable refresh rate there. Even though we're still seeing a lot of stutters happen and a lot of hitches happen over time while still playing this game. CPU cores and threads, we're sitting anywhere between 90% usage on Core 6 all the way to 60% usage on every other core and thread as well. So even for a $1,000 handheld, we're seeing Unreal Engine 5 still bring a lot of devices basically down to their knees and crippling them directly. Traversal stutters, games not running properly, having massive issues with CPU bottlenecks, and at the same time just not having a good experience overall. We just saw another traversal stutter there right now. Again, if your CPU is not up to the task, you're going to have a tough time. And from what I see with consoles, they're having a really difficult time too, especially in most open world games. Unreal Engine 5 is an absolute disaster, and that's pretty much what we're going to be dealing with for the next generation, unfortunately, because everybody's still trying to use it. We're even dropping down to 37 FPS on this device. Literally makes no sense whatsoever with low settings and balanced to quality upscaling. That's really just insane if you want to ask me. But anyways, I really feel like this game needs a lot of work under the hood, and Unreal Engine 5 is in fact not doing it any favors whatsoever. I think that right now what you should do is wait for updates for this device and try to get better performance overall after you go through and get some updates for this game to have a better experience. We knocked it down to performance with FSR just to see what we would get. 45 FPS, 47. So yeah, locking it to 45 FPS on your Asus ROG Ally or Ally X. But yeah, locking it to 45 FPS on your Asus ROG Ally X would be the ideal scenario. You'll get a better experience, you have better playtime, and at least at that moment in time, you won't feel as bad while playing it, sitting in between that 45 to 50 FPS mark and not really getting a good idea with variable refresh rate. So it sucks because Outer Worlds 1 was a great game, and having this ubiquitous use of Unreal Engine 5 really isn't good for anyone overall. Again, more stutters all the time. But even then, I want to hear what you guys have to say with your performance as well. Do you guys like the inclusion of the Ally X on these PC port reviews? And I want to hear what you guys are dealing with in terms of stutters for this game, or even if you actually are enjoying it. If you want to see more PC port reviews, subscribe to the channel. We are going to be doing more of them more often, as well as more stuff with the Ally X and the Steam Deck as well. As always, though, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you gooners next time. Peace!